Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to Marvelous Designer for Beginners series. Marvelous Designer is one of the best application packages out there for making, editing, and resewing 3D cloths. You can easily add wrinkles for your characters or your props with only a few clicks, and even create countless variation from what you created inside the application. So the aim of this series is to walk you through all the main tools, do's and don'ts, and the industry standard workflow. So hopefully by the end of it, you can just dive right in and accurately create cloth simulation for your model, add wrinkles to your characters or props, and just enjoy the process. Now we have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Now let's talk about the user interface before we dive right in with tools and buttons and shortcuts. This is the main workspace when you open Marvelous Designer. I'm using Marvelous Designer 11. You may use a higher version, but for now, that's the current default user interface every time you open the application. You can see on the left-hand side, I have these guys. So I'm just going to double click on it so I have something in the scene so we can talk about stuff. The application is composed of two main tabs, a general tab and store tab. The general tab is what you spend maybe 99% of the time, and store tab is where you want to purchase additional stuff. There are some free stuff in there as well, where you want to probably double click and buy it from the Marvelous Designer Market store and just add it to your project. But we are not going to cover that tab at all, because it's just very straightforward. You pick your item, you purchase it, and you bring it into your project. We spend time inside the general tab here, where there are many tools to explore and there are workflows to discuss. Next is to discuss workspace. So right at the bottom right, you have four windows. Single mode, where you have only one mode to look at, and you have a tiny window right here, and that window allows you to toggle between different modes. So I can go to property editor, I can just have a look at the library, I can go and look at the history, so on and so forth. Next one is two windows side to side, which is the default mode, where you look at a 3D window in one side, and usually the other window will be 2D pattern window. The third mode is new to Marvelous Designer 11, where you have three modes and you can customize a mode. Just be mindful of the fact that if you, for example, pick 2D pattern window, you cannot have the secondary 2D pattern window. If I click on this, it basically brings the 2D pattern here, but it changes the main 2D pattern that you picked to begin with. So one window at a time. And then we have the 4 mode, which is quite common amongst 3D application packages, such as Max or Maya, where you specify and create different angles or different windows for different patterns. And every window you specify different functionalities per viewport. And with each viewport, you can actually change the mode as well. For example, the top left can be just button, bottom left can be just fabric, so on and so forth. Now, if you're kind of not used to this workflow, then you can easily click on the last button and reset the workflow. And that brings you back to the 3D window on the left and 2D pattern window on the right. Speaking of which, the 3D window is where you actually see your simulation, and some of the tools in that window allow you to tweak your cloth in a 3D space. 2D window is where you actually create and design your cloth using vector-based tools. Now, to get slightly more real estate, if you are kind of don't want to see all of these buttons, if it feels overwhelming to you to start with, you can actually click on this 3D window toolbar and hide them temporarily. You can do that for this one as well. But for now, I'm just going to bring them back. For each window, we have 3 buttons. The collapse window, which is not going to close the window, it's just going to collapse it to the side. And I can go in there and click and bring it back. The duplicate window, which is actually quite useful, that you duplicate the active window. Let's say I want to look at the sculpt menu, right? And you may want to even bring this back and dock it somewhere here. So you have 2 tabs right next to each other. Or you may make a decision to just completely close this window. And each window, again, you can just go ahead and change its functionality via this drop down. So a lot of flexibilities around the user interface. It's very, very dynamic and very straightforward. We have a few drop downs at the top, but to be honest with you, many of these can be achieved through these buttons right here. And by the way, they're not single buttons. If I hover my mouse, you can see we have a drop down, a list basically that goes to some of them. And every time you have a window with a drop down, there's a dotted line with a pair of scissors on it. This means that you can actually tear off that menu. So if I click on that pair of scissors, you actually can have that as a floating window, and you can have as many as you want. For example, I can go in here and tear off this menu as well. And if you realize that there are certain tools that you use a lot, then bring the menu on your side, even on the other monitors, and just move forward with your work. Now, before I wrap up the UI part, just want you to know that these 2 windows, or any windows that you have open in the user interface, they're linked together. So whatever changes you make here, it will have an impact on the other window without you clicking on any apply or any submit button. For example, if I go and let's say I'm going to change a few points here, you can see the result live gets updated on the other window. So just be mindful of the fact that these 2 windows are linked together. That's actually the preferred user interface that I would like to work with. But again, you may find yourself having more windows open with different workspace on the bottom right of the screen can work better for you. So by all means, practice that and go for it. But even for those workspaces, everything is linked. So you change something, it will change across the board. All right, let's move on to the next chapter when we start exploring few buttons here and there inside the application. Now, before I start with the process, I would like to make certain changes to my settings via preferences window. It just makes the whole experience more enjoyable. This is by no means a mandatory step to follow, but I recommend it based on my own workflow. It works much better with the settings that I'm about to introduce. I'm going to go to setting, preferences, and to preferences. Anti-aliasing, I'll leave it to 16. High anti-aliasing, this is just a softness around the borders and edges. You definitely want to experience better performance, so by all means bring this down to 4. Now, the reason that I'm going through preferences now as opposed to in the middle of the session is because any changes you make, you need to restart the application for that to take place. So if I, let's say, go to X4, you see that it says that the program must be restarted, and that's the main reason I'm covering this section now, so I can restart my computer after covering this section so we can start with our session. I'm going to leave it as X16. It works just fine. I have AMD 5550X and it's more than capable to handle those simulation. I'm going to go to view controls, and one change I make is instead of orienting around the scene with the default setup, which is the middle mouse button for pan and left mouse alt for zoom. I'm going to go into regular mouse and I pick Maya. I'm an avid Maya user, and that makes it a lot easier for me to hold down alt, left mouse button, middle mouse button, and right mouse button for orbit, for pan, and for zoom. So as you can see, alt, middle mouse for pan, alt, right mouse for zoom, and you can at any point of time customize them if you want, but it works just fine for me. Next one is shortcut, which we will get to that at some point where we realize that there are certain tools that we use a lot, so we can just set a shortcut for it. User interface, there's really not much to talk about. The only thing that I would like to be mindful of is the unit system. We will talk about unit system in the next chapter, but I will keep it at millimeter now, so don't worry about it. Again, it gives us some option to change the 3D toolbar and 2D toolbar, the location of it here. So I'm not going to change any of that. Feel free to change the mesh from triangle to quad. I am going to do that. That would be my preferred way of working. While I'm in this window, I'm going to change the gizmo from unified gizmo to divided gizmo. Again, totally optional. I'm used to toggling between Q, W, and E to get move, rotation, and select mode, as opposed to having them all in one gizmo. If you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, is if I bring one object and just simply click on it, you can see that I have all 2 gizmos in one go, so I can move it and I can rotate it at the same time. While this workflow is preferred for many artists, I tend to have a more traditional approach where I divide gizmos like so. So I press W on the keyboard, it only moves the object, and I switch to E and it only rotates the object. With that, I kind of eliminate a little bit of confusion, and this is something that I'm simply used to. That's all. All right, that's all there is to it. I'm going to restart the program with the settings that I just set, and we are going to continue with our session. While you can start with avatars by going to File, Add an Avatar, I would like to start from an actual model. Now remember, you can start with avatar, but then transferring your information and your work from an avatar to your actual model can be a bit of a pain. So why not starting with your actual model inside Marvelous Designer and just continue with your work. Now, before I get into that, let's take a peek at my base mesh in Maya, because I have something really important I would like to show you. Here I am inside Maya, and here is my base mesh, which I will provide to you guys so you can download it. But the main point is this. So basically inside Maya, and it's not just Maya, any software packages, you can just adjust that. I'm going to go to Preferences, I'm going to go to Settings, and you can see my work unit is set to meter, and this character is 1.8 meters long. So be a little bit realistic with your character and with your measurements, so you get a much better result in Marvelous Designer. And then after that, simply I go ahead and go to export and export my base mesh as FBX, and I've already done that, so need to do that. Let's switch back to Marvelous and see how we can bring our base mesh into the scene. Okay, here I am inside Marvelous Designer. I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Import, and you can import OBJ, you can import FBS, you can bring Alembic, and the cool thing about this version 11 is you can bring Maya cache files as well, MC and NCX, which is truly awesome. We have FBX, we already know that. And bring my base mesh. It says if you wish to bring camera, if you have animation, bring animation. If the cache is attached to your animation. So basically you have animation, but it's not a limbic, it's a cached animation. You can bring that too and automatically add arrangement points. I always add that. It just adds arrangement points on the bound volume. We'll talk about it later. Scale, I set this to meter. I think the default, yes, the default is millimeter. I'm going to set that to meter because, well, my scene in Maya was set to meter, and that's the part that, again, you need to cross-reference. If you have your scenes in cm working units, then you go ahead and pick cm working units. Again, meter it is, and bring the scene. I've got my model ready to go. I'm going to go into setting preferences and enable quality render. It just makes it a lot easier for me to see the model. You can see I have the 3D model, Alt left mouse button to orbit around, Alt middle mouse to pan, and Alt right mouse to zoom. Also scroll does the same thing. And you can see the silhouette of your character in the 2D pattern window as well, which is pretty useful. Now, if I select the model, I get to property editor. So let's actually have a look at those ones. With non-unified gizmo, I can press W and press R to just toggle between the two. If you would like to get a bigger gizmo, you use brackets. So left brackets make it smaller, and right bracket, if I just tap, it makes it bigger. Very, very simple. About the orientation of your gizmo, if I just have a look right here, you can see it's pretty straight, perpendicular to the position of the character. But just in case, if you would like to adjust it differently, you can go to local coordinate, where it kind of looks at the orientation of your model, or the coordinates of your model in a local level, and adjust that. I personally prefer world, and if at any point of time I want to change it, I switch to local. I almost never pick screen coordinate because it just looks really, really weird. It actually fixes the coordinates like an aim constraint assigned to each coordinate. It doesn't matter how you move the character, the coordinate follows the screen, which makes it very difficult for me to work with. So word coordinate is, and I'm very happy with it. Just quick tips about the model that you have on your right hand side. It asks for the name of the mesh. Well, I'm going to put my name in it, and I'm by no means as fit as this character. It's just a wish thing, so completely ignore that. Surface, not going to talk about it right now because it talks about skin offset, static friction. So far we haven't had any cloth in the scene, so we're not going to discuss that. One thing that you may want to have a look at is the fabric, and what type of fabric you would like to have if you were to start with your cloth right away. I'm just gonna set it to default. We're not gonna change anything. If you would like to bring normal map or displacement map so it shows more accurately for the character, you sure can. The color, there is no color assigned to it. The opacity, we are not going to touch that. A reflection, really not a good option for the base character that you bring, but just to show you, you can completely turn that into T-1000 character in Terminator if you want to, but just that doesn't make any sense. So I usually keep the reflection low and bring the roughness high because that's how skin looks like. And that should really do the trick for how to prepare your scene for Marvelous Designer to start with your work. Once you get to that stage, we now can explore buttons, functionalities, so on and so forth. Thank you very much for watching, and see you guys in the next video.